Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of our series that has been, for me, very stimulating. I hope for you as well, in the teachings of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, who never fails to impress with his creativity. Our subject tonight, of course, is the Parasha, double Parasha Matot-Masei, which you can find in Bamidbar. Excuse me. In fact, two parashas, which are most often joined together, conclude the book of Bamidbar. So we're going to start tonight with chapter 31. Excuse me, not the beginning of the parasha, but it is the beginning of an independent subject, which is the battle against Midian. So we're chapter 31, Pasuk Aleph and base. Vayidber Hashem al Moshe lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Nakom nikmas bnei Yisrael me'es hamidyanim." Now, this is not an instruction simply to Moshe to tell the Jewish people, because it doesn't say Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the Jewish people. I'm sure he did, but the Torah doesn't specify. It seems to be an instruction to Moshe specifically. Nakom nikmas bnei Yisrael me'es hamidyanim, avenge the vengeance of the children of Israel from the Midianites. Achar te'asef el amecha. That's why I say it is evidently directed to Moshe specifically, because there's an instruction at the end, or at least if you like, it's more than a prophecy, really. Hashem is setting out to Moshe the sequence of events. Avenge the Jewish people against the Midianites, and then you will be gathered unto your people. In other words, Moshe's death is dependent on this war. And Rashi says that Moshe got right to it. And the next pasuk, the word heichalsu, in modern Hebrew, you have the word chalutzim. The chalutzim are the pioneers. Heichalsu means to act with alacrity, like the vanguard. We'll see that later on in the parsha as well, actually. So Rashi says that Moshe is praised here for not delaying or not looking for reasons to, put off this campaign, or even at least to farm it out to give someone else. Actually, I mean, he does instruct Pinchas, I think, to participate in it. But in any case, Moshe is credited with initiating the war against Midian in accordance with instruction, even though his death is dependent upon it. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, though, has another angle here. This whole war, which is narrated in the rest of the chapter that follows, is against the nation of Midian. It's because of what the Midianites did to them. They led the Jewish men astray in promiscuity, also in idolatry. Baal Peor, Peor is an idol. And according to the rabbinic tradition, it was the lure of the illicit sexual opportunity that then brought the people to worship idolatry as well, and the two are closely connected to one another. But what about the Moabites? This whole plan began with Balak. In last week's parsha, or really 2 weeks ago, we have Balak was the king of Moab. He was acting in concert with Midian, but he was the one who spearheaded the plan first to hire Bilam, and then to take Bilam's advice to initiate this campaign of debauchery, which was, of course, quite successful from their point of view. So Moab surely at least has a share, is complicit in this offensive against the Jewish people, and therefore the counterattack, the sort of retribution, should be directed against Moab as well. But it says, Nakom nikmas bnei Yisrael, avenge the vengeance of the children of Israel, me'es hamidyanim. And so it is. The Torah describes the battle with the Midianites and who was killed and how many captives and what type of booty and the extent of the plunder and all of that. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz has an interesting suggestion. He says that actually the Jewish people, even the men, were not seduced by the Moabite women. The Moabite women were not successful in luring the men to fornication and to debauchery, because the Jewish people shunned the the Moabites. They actually were not interested in that kind of intimate association with Moab. Probably he sort of alludes to this because of their sordid origins. Where did Moab come from? The hint is in the name. Moab is Me'av, from the father. Remember that Moab was the result of an incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughter. The child that was born from that union is called Moab. So therefore, the Jewish people were not interested in Moab. They shunned them. You could say they disdained Moab. Just by way of illustration, we had a case in the London Bethlehem some years ago, of a Jewish boy, young man. I think he was from a kind of upper middle class family, educated, professional family. I think he was quite successful as well. And he was romantically entwined with a girl who was pretty, flirty, needy, of low birth, low class. Her mother was a heroin addict, and her father, it's questionable if she ever knew him or even knew who he was. And this girl who was had some, let's say, charms, not of the intellectual or the moral variety, attracted the attention of this boy. And his family were dead set against it, not because she wasn't Jewish, but because she was of low class, even though, superficially, she actually was quite attractive, if you get the meaning. Okay, I have to say that she did not succeed, and they went their separate ways. I'm pleased. I think he got engaged to a Jewish girl. So, okay, but I'm just illustrating. Yonatan Eibeschutz, in a few words, says the Jews had the same attitude towards the Moabites. They shunned them. But Midian, even though I'm not saying the Midianites were so high class, type of women, but Midian, where did Midian come from? I may surprise you if you don't recall by reminding you that Midian was a son of Avraham Avinu. Midian was one of the sons of Avraham through a concubine, maybe through Hagar. Whoever the mother was is not clearly stated, but the Torah says that Avraham had a number of sons. After Yishmael and after Yitzchak, Midian was one of them. So the Midianites, at least they were, brothers or cousins, distant cousins of ours. And therefore, now, what about the fact that the Pasuk says, Vayachel, I'll just show you the Pasuk. It says, earlier, that, in Pasuk Chaf Hey, just take a look in Pasuk Chaf Hey, towards the end of Parshas Balak, it says, look at chapter 25, verse 1. Please take a look at it. It's worthwhile. Pasuk, chapter 25, verse 1, towards the end of Parshas Balak. So this is after Bilam has gone home, after he has despaired of cursing the Jewish people, but he did dispense some advice. And that's the next verse, 25, verse 1. Vayeshev Yisrael b'Shittim, vayachel ha'am liznos eblenos Moab. The people began to engage in illicit relations with the daughters of Midian. How did that come about? So how it came about is obvious. But says Rabbi Eibeschutz, that wasn't the Jewish people. He has a theme which he develops many places. He says that the word ha'am, when it uses the word ha'am to refer to the Jewish people, the nation, it means like the lower masses. It means the Erev Rav. Bnei Yisrael is Bnei Yisrael. Ha'am refers to the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, the hangers-on. So according to Yonatan Eibeschutz, even though the Torah at the simple level says the Jewish people were seduced by the Midianite women, it's not so. He says that it was the Erev Rav, the hangers-on. It was those opportunists who left Egypt with the Jewish people. They were the ones who were seduced by the Moabites. They were not that discerning in their let's say, choice of partners, but the Jewish people shunned the Moabites. But the Midianites, they did get involved with, and that's Bnei. That's why the pasuk says, turning back to where we are now, Nekom nikmas Bnei Yisrael meis Midianim. The children of Israel, they got involved with the Midianite women, and that was catastrophic. 24,000 people died as a result of that. Then he adds on, just as a final flourish, that the word nikmas of vengeance is associated, like the pasuk says elsewhere, cherev nokemes nekom bris, the sword that avenges the vengeance of the covenant. And that alludes to the covenant of circumcision, which in turn symbolizes moral probity, restraint, chastity, and that was corrupted, and therefore the Jewish people were seeking to avenge the betrayal, their own betrayal. But of course, the Midianites were the excuse me, the cause of their downfall, and the Midianites deliberately sought to harm the Jewish people, for which they were, as I said, punished, or they were avenged in this campaign. So that's Nekom Nekam B'nei Yisrael, the vengeance of the children of Israel. That's Cherev Nokemes Nekom Bris, because of the corruption, or the degradation of the mark of the covenant, which was compromised as a result of that incident. We'll return to this actually later in our discussion tonight as well. I want to take up the next subject to explore tonight. Turn forward one chapter. So chapter 32, Lamed Beis Pasuk Aleph. So the Milchemes Midian we've dealt with, we haven't dealt with it at length, but that is chapter 31. Chapter 32 is a whole different subject. Umikne Rav Haya Livnei Reuven v'Livnei Gad Atzum Ma'od. Abundant cattle, very abundant, a lot of cattle. The children of Reuven and Gad had a lot of cattle, greatly abundant. Atzum ma'od, they had a lot of cattle, a lot of livestock. And they looked around and they saw the land where they were presently, which was in the Transjordan, the east bank of the Jordan. The Jewish people were poised soon to enter the land of Israel, but they were in the land of Sichon and Og that they had captured. They had conquered that land. They were ready to enter the land of Israel. And they approached Moshe with a petition. And they said, we see that these cities and this whole region that the Jewish people have conquered, that Hashem has placed in our hands, it's great for pasture. And that's what we've got. We've got a lot of livestock. So Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz asks the question, which many have wondered, myself included, why is it that the families of these two tribes, Reuven and Gad, why did they have so much livestock? What caused them to have more livestock than anyone else? The Jewish people collectively left Egypt with a lot of wealth and with livestock as well, fair enough. Moreover, the war against Midian, the Torah says explicitly, part of the profit or the spoils of war, part of the bounty was a lot of livestock as well, and the Torah describes how they divvied it up. Presumably, each of the tribes were approximately similar size, besides which the army consisted of 1,000 representatives per tribe. So each tribe had the same proportion of the fighting force. It's logical to presume they would each have approximately similar take in the booty. So what was it that brought about Reuven and Gad having so much livestock? So some of the Mefarshim say, well, they must have been more successful in the war. In fact, Or HaChaim even says this, they were giborei milchama, they were especially effective or fierce warriors, and therefore they plundered more than the share of the others because they were more effective. Well, that could be, but I'm very loath to critique the Or HaChaim, but it still begs the question, why were they? Okay, God, you could say there's an explanation for God, because when God was born, his mother said, God gedud yigudenu v'hu yigudenu akev. Or rather, not when he was born, but and Yaakov or Moshe, one of them, bless him, God gedud yigudenu. A gedud is a battalion in modern Hebrew as well. So you could say that God was like a battalion and they were natural warriors. But what about Reuven? We don't find that I'm aware that Reuven were superior warriors per se. So it's just speculative. Someone to say, which probably is closer to the pshat, that actually their livestock was not more numerous than anyone else's. They all had a lot of livestock, but Reuven and Gad were more, let's say, conscious of it and were more impressed with it, attached more importance to it. Because as is very well known, Rashi and the sages criticized these two tribes for choosing to stay in the Transjordan because it was more profitable. They put their pecuniary betterment before their spiritual or national identification or wanting to be together with the rest of Klal Yisrael. But on the surface of it, although that tradition is very well known, Rashi mentions it, we don't actually find that they're criticized. Moshe initially criticizes them because he thought that they were unwilling to participate in the conquest of the land. But once they explain they're going to participate, they're going to be in the forefront of the campaign, then Moshe says, great, if you do that, then that's fine. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz goes with that approach. So according to what I was going to say is, according to the idea that they were more interested in their livestock than they should have been, they were more conscious. In their view, they had a lot of livestock, and they were concerned to ensure that they had enough pasture land so they can continue to grow their herds and their flock and all of that. But really, they didn't have more than anyone else. They all had a great deal of livestock. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, however, says something better, I think. If one can say that it's better, I'll leave it for you to ponder. He says like this: Moshe, we know, was buried in the Transjordan. He did not enter the land of Israel. He was destined to die and to be buried. It was not even, his remains were not even transferred to the land of Israel, as is very well known. Why was he left to be buried forevermore in such a place? So the Medrash says that it was to atone for the sin of Pa'or. Pa'or was one of the gods of the Midianites, maybe the primary god of the Midianites, and the Jewish people were guilty of the promiscuity and the idolatry at that time, as a result of the influence of these Midianite women. So therefore Moshe was buried there, lechaper, to atone for the sin of Pa'or. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz explains why. What's the connection? Because in order to worship Pa'or, and excuse me, this is a bit earthy, but there is tradition, there is evidence, archaeological evidence, and certainly biblical evidence, certainly according to the rabbinic tradition, that this Pa'or, the worship of Pa'or, involved very crass and crude behavior. It involved eating, and then when a person was experiencing the normal digestive implications of eating, so he would go off to the temple in order to relieve himself in front of the idol, and that was the way the idol was worshipped. And we do find other instances of that, the god of the sewer and that sort of thing you can find if you look it up in Wikipedia, which is what I did. So we do find such a tradition existing, and according to the sages, Pa'or, which means to evacuate, was worshipped in that way. Now, I know it all sounds a bit vulgar, but remember that those who ate the man were not subject to that consequence, because the man was spiritual food. It was absorbed into the body, and there was no need for any evacuation. There was no need for the body to excrete that which was surplus to its healthful needs. This was part of the segula of the man. So in order to worship Pa'or, they had to eat regular food. They had to reject the man, which they did reject the man, as we know, and the man was in the merit of Moshe. So the man was in the merit of Moshe. They rejected Moshe, they rejected the man, they wanted to eat other food, real food. Where's the beef? So they slaughtered their cattle. So that's why Gad and Reuven, they did not reject the man. They ate only man. That's why they had no interest in Pa'or, because they were not even able to worship Pa'or according to the methodology. Moreover, that's why they had so much cattle, because the other Jews, the rest of the tribes, they slaughtered their cattle, not all of it, but from time to time they would slaughter, they have a big braai. But the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, they didn't do that, and that's why Moshe is buried in their chelek, because they did not reject the man, and they were not guilty of worshiping Pa'or in that way, but they were guilty of worshiping, of the promiscuity with the Midianite women, and we'll get to that shortly. That's the first suggestion that he advances, that's why Bnei Gad, that's why they had more mikneh, more livestock, because they didn't slaughter it. Whereas the rest of the Jewish people, they kind of culled their herd and their flock from time to time. They reduced it because they wanted something to eat. Then he says something further, that the Torah says, man kezera gad. The man is described as a coriander seed, kezera gad. Of course, Gad is the name of this tribe. So there you have the remez that the tribe of Gad, they loved the man, whereas others rejected it at certain times, or got tired of it. But Bnei Gad did not. They chivivu es haman, they loved the man. And again, that's why they were able to maintain their flocks and their herd. What about Reuven? So he says a different thing for Reuven, very clever. Reuven, at the end of the day, Reuven was the Bechor, the firstborn. Of the 12 tribes of Israel, Reuven was the firstborn. Now, it's true that he lost the designation of the firstborn in different ways. So in terms of the double tribe allocation, it went to Yosef. His two sons, Ephraim and Menashe, were each tribes. So he got a double portion in that regard. He lost the position of the religious leadership, went to Levi. He lost the position of the political leadership, the temporal leadership, it went to Yehuda, the princely tribe. So it's true that Reuven lost it in those primary ways. But it could still be that the actual monetary implications of being the firstborn, namely that you inherit from your father's estate a double portion, that he still got. So it's true in terms of destiny, in these more dramatic ways, Reuven lost it. But in the technical status of actually claiming a double portion in the estate, the legacy of his father, it could be that he still retained. Now, Yaakov was a herdsman. That was his main profession. The family were herdsmen. When Yaakov died, says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, Reuven inherited a double portion. But not only that, he says something further, very clever. We know that Yaakov's flock was extremely productive, very fertile. That is to say, if another flock of sheep yields a certain number of lambs, they yielded much more. And we know that's how Yaakov became wealthy. Once Lavan agreed to give Yaakov a certain proportion of the increase in the flock year by year, in a short period of time, Yaakov became very wealthy. That's because his sheep reproduced more readily. And he explains another medrash that says he sold it bedamim yikarim. People paid a lot of money for it. Of course, they paid extra money for it because his flock had the segula, had the sort of, you could say, a form of an early form of breeding, for the best quality, the best, healthiest ram, ewes, and all of that. So according to that Yaakov's flock was especially productive. So when Reuven inherited a double portion, it would make sense how even many generations later, his flock would still be, numerically larger than the others. So again, he suggests that Reuven and Gad ate the man so they didn't have to slaughter their livestock. And furthermore, he says that Gad, the man is described as Kezera Gad. So that's why they liked the man, and Reuven inherited a double portion in the flock and in the animals and the livestock of his father, and therefore even generations later, the implications of that were still evident, and he had more proportionally than the other tribes. In the minutes we have left, I want to answer the question that we circulated as the title of our shir tonight, the Menashe mystery. Now, what is the Menashe mystery? Before we get to the answer of solving the mystery, what is the mystery? Well, there is, I think, a very clear Menashe mystery, which appears in chapter 32, later on in our same parak, Pasuk Lamed Gimel. It's towards the very end of this, near the end of this chapter, after the Torah describes the petition of Reuven and Gad, they want to stay in Transjordan, and Moshe's initial reaction and their clarification and Moshe's repetition of what they've committed themselves to. And he says, if you do that, then we're okay. We got a deal. And finally, in verse 33, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Vayiten lehem Moshe Livnei Gad v'livnei Reuven, to the sons of Gad and the sons of Reuven, v'lachatzi shevet Menashe ben Yosef, and to half of the tribe of Menashe, the son of Yosef, Mamleches Sichon melech Amori. So he gave them the land of the Amorites and Og melech Bashan, etc. Where and why does the where do they come from? Why does the Torah mention the half of the tribe of Menashe? They never asked to be there. We don't find they were part of the original petition. We don't find them mentioned subsequently that they got on board with this proposal. Just when the Torah says that Moshe allocated to these two tribes the land that they asked for, he says half of the tribe of Menashe. Actually, it was a bit less than half because of the 8 extended families in Menashe. 2 of them, it was 2 out of 8, but even so, it was a portion of the tribe of Menashe was in the Transjordan. Why? How did they get there? Why did Moshe place them there? And the Meforshim have some ideas, and again, well, I'm going to tell you my suggestion, which it's too clever for me to have thought of on my own, although I'm not quite sure where I saw it. But ArtScroll has some ideas. I don't find them that compelling, but let me tell you what Yonatan Eibeschutz says. Very clever. So he poses the following question. The Torah describes, if you take a look a few verses earlier, verse 20, Pasuk Chaf, Vayomer Alehem Moshe. Moshe said to the tribes of Reuven and Gad, Im ta'asuna sadabar hazeh, if you do this thing, Im teichaltzu l'fnei Hashem lamilchama, if you go with alacrity, if you are the chalutzim, if you are the vanguard, if you are the pioneers, l'fnei Hashem lamilchama, before God. So he says that means if you go together with the ark, or maybe even ahead of the ark, because that symbolized the presence of Hashem, and that enabled the Jewish nation at that time to conquer the land of Canaan. If you do that, then you will be allocated this land, and that's great. And that's exactly what they did. By the way, in the book of Yeshua, we have the description. That's exactly what they did, which means they had great merit. They had merit to accompany the Aron, the ark, into the battle. They led the battle. They were the ones who were spearheaded the campaign. Very, very nice. He asks, from where did they get that merit? What earned them that great merit to be in the vanguard of the campaign? And also he says, what about Menashe? Why do we find half of the tribe of Menashe there? So we've already said that the tribes of Reuven and Gad, chivavu es haman, they loved the man. They had a special affinity, whereas the rest of the Jewish people in more than one place got tired of it, complained about it. They did not. And therefore, they did not sin in the chet of Pa'or as well. Again, we explained why that is, because since they only ate the man, so they didn't have the sort of opportunity or the temptation and the involvement, and they didn't want to do what the other ones did, which is the other ones spurned the man in order to eat other food, in order to worship Pa'or. It's all very distasteful. These tribes didn't do that. In that regard, they were faithful. They were faithful vis-a-vis idolatry, but they were theologically upright, but when it came to personal morality, personal temptation, they were led astray by the Benos Midian, Benos Moab as well. He says, even though earlier we said the Jewish people didn't get involved with the Moabites women. So for that reason, says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, Moshe strategically placed with those 2 tribes of Gad and Reuven the tribe of Menashe ben Yosef. The tribe of Yosef, as we know, became subdivided into Menashe and Ephraim. So the tribe of Menashe ben Yosef was with them. Why? Because Yosef was distinguished for his consonance. He was distinguished for resisting the approach, the blandishments of the wife of Potiphar. Yosef summoned extreme self-control, as the Torah describes. He left his garment in her arms and in her hands, and he fled, and he ended up back in the dungeon as a result of that, because she framed him. Yosef resisted temptation. So therefore, Menashe stayed with them because they needed that encouragement. They needed that example of Menashe, who had the strength of Ephraim. I would like to add, he doesn't say this, but I would like to add something further. Yosef had another distinction. Yosef is called Tzadik Yesod Olam because of his self-restraint, as we just mentioned. But Yosef had another great distinction, and that is he loved the land of Israel. He associated with the land of Israel. He identified himself with the land of Israel. When he was brought before Pharaoh, he said, "Gunov ganavti liv me'eretz." I'm sorry, to the butler. He said, "Gunov ganavti me'eretz Havim." I was stolen for the land of the Ivrim. In other words, Yosef did not miss an opportunity to identify with the land of Israel. And I think that is why Menashe, it's the other reason why Menashe was there, because Menashe loved the land of Israel. So by putting part of the tribe of Menashe with Reuven and Gad, and the rest of the tribe of Menashe in the land of Israel, Menashe was the bridge. Menashe, who had a natural love for the land of Israel, and who had, of course, just by way of family associations, his own close cousins and family members on the other side of the Jordan River with the rest of the tribe of Menashe. So he was the kesher between Reuven and Gad, who were in Transjordan, by designating the Menashe should be there as well. Menashe was the link. Menashe kept them connected in that regard. I think that's why Chatzi Shev Menashe wasn't the whole tribe of Menashe. The whole point is to divide Menashe. He will be the glue. He will be the kesher. He will be the means of connecting Reuven and Gad with the rest of the tribes of Israel, because Menashe ben Yosef had that quality. Moreover, we find the daughters of Tzlaf Chad were from Menashe as well, and they were the ones who loved the land of Israel. Tunu lanu achuzah, give us our portion in the land. Then he mentions one final thing, we're all into overtime, which I don't like to be. He says that there's another point as well, and that is that Yaakov had 4 firstborn. His ultimate firstborn was Reuven, the firstborn of Leah, and Yaakov's real firstborn. But he also had Gad, was the firstborn of his mother, Dan was the firstborn of his mother, and Yosef was the firstborn of his mother as well. So of the 12 sons of Yaakov, there were 4 firstborn to Yaakov's 4 wives, 2 wives, and the two maidservants as well. So Dan took with him Pesel Micha, and therefore he lost the opportunity, he lost the status of being able to be in the forefront, because he had this Pesel Micha, this idol that came with him. We have to discuss why and why that is and the significance another time. So therefore the 3 Bechorim of Yaakov, the 3 firstborn of Yaakov, the natural leaders among Yaakov's sons, were the ones who were left in Transjordan to go in the vanguard, to be the chalutzim before the Aron, to lead the campaign in the land of Israel. That is Reuven, that is Gad, and finally that is Menashe as well, because Menashe was the firstborn of Yosef, who was the firstborn of Rachel. So Yaakov had 4 firstborn sons. Dan, as I said, lost his status, or at least it would not be appropriate for him to claim that status when the tribe of Dan actually smuggled out this idol from Egypt. I'm sorry to say, the Medrash talks about that. It's also in the book of Shoftim. You can read about it there. And therefore, it was left to the other 3, who are all the firstborn of Yaakov, and they were the ones who were in the vanguard. So this is how Rabbi Eibeschutz looks at it. Those 2 tribes were more meritorious. He asks, wherein did they acquire the merit? We've explained, because they did not fall prey to the idolatry of Pa'or. And nevertheless, they were prone, perhaps you could say every person is prone, maybe by the nature of by the masculine part of the species, to that kind of degenerate attraction under certain circumstances, and therefore Menashe was placed with them, as we said, to help them in that regard. Sorry to talk and run, but I think we've covered some interesting material in a parsha that has quite a lot of technical text, but I think I believe it's new to me in any case, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you, and I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom.